I've been working in TV long enough that I have the privilege of sometimes going back and doing stories I've done before to sort of update or experience a culture that I've seen before and see how it's changed, or see the ways in which it's moved on, got worse, got more strange. And so for me, it was a chance to experience the extremes of an ideology that combines religious zealotry, nationalism, and a militarized support infrastructure, and to kind of get to grips with that journalistically and emotionally. The West Bank is an area to the east of Israel that was basically occupied in 1967 in a war, and since then Israeli citizens have moved in and formed settlements, outposts and settlements, illegally under international law. Some of them are there for economic reasons because the housing is relatively cheap, and some of them are there because they are deeply religious or religious nationalist ideologues, and they are attempting to build a greater Israel and view it as their divine right to drive out the Palestinians who've been living there for generations. So that's the backdrop to the story. I made a film there in 2010, it went out in 2011, meeting some of the settlers. And then I heard more recently that since October 7th, with the world's attention on Gaza, these religious nationalist settlers have been emboldened to go further, to push harder, to harass their Palestinian neighbors, and to attempt to drive them out. So I decided to go back and find out who was doing it, right, to meet the people who were sort of the ideological standard bearers for the settlers, and also to see firsthand what the consequences were of what they were doing. At the heart of the film is a woman called Daniela Weiss. I had interviewed her, but only briefly in 2010. Even then she was known as the godmother of the settler movement. You know, in my work, there's always this balance between attempting to be a little bit of a fly on the wall, right, not intervening, seeing how things are going to unfold, letting people feel they can express themselves unself-consciously, but at the same time challenging them enough to bring out the contradictions or the parts of it that I feel don't make sense, and also allowing the viewer to feel safe, like so that it's not a case of uncritically platforming highly divisive or questionable beliefs. I'm curious to know roughly how many settlements and outposts you've been, let's say, in some way involved in the establishment.
Almost everyone.
For real?
It's 50 years. You know what it means, 50 years, that I do what I do today?
Because it's territory that was won in the '67 war, that under the Geneva Convention, transferring a civilian population into a conquered terrain, that's considered a war crime.
What I do here is a war crime.
According to the UN.
You're cooperating with the person who committed war crime?
Well, I'm interviewing you.
It's a light felony.
The other thing that's changed, obviously, is that with the war in Gaza, now the settlers see an opportunity to expand there. We document an event at which the whole plan is being laid out and lobbied for, and families are being enlisted to be part of this whole project of putting hundreds of new families, new settlements in Gaza, literally as it's being bombed. I spent about 2 weeks filming up and down the West Bank. You know, every day was a kind of some new experience of the strangeness of what a military occupation looks like, in which you've got two communities, 3 million Palestinians, a few 100,000 Jewish settlers, side by side and subject to different, very different legal regimes, right? That in itself, it felt like being immersed in a kind of dystopian movie, fully legible in the infrastructure of the environment.
Wait. ID, please.
For what reason?
It's the police.
מה האזרחות שלך? את פלסטינאי?
Yes.
אז אתה רואה שם, אתה לא רואה את ה...
That one?
כן, אתה מתרחש שם.
But I know that I'm allowed to be here until here.
Say, you are not allowed.
Why can't he be with us?
Because there are limits for Palestinians, so he can't. If he lives here, he can reach. But here, no. Give me your ID, please.
How come Palestinians can't come down here?
It's not work like that. Which camera? We're not talking to you.
It seems ironic that that's the visitors centre, right, for tourists and whatnot, and he can't actually visit in his own city. It's no secret that this is a subject that gets heavily scrutinised, that it can be divisive. There's a lot of people who feel very strongly. And going into this, that was on my mind. If I'm honest, it was on my mind, but I didn't find it incapacitating. And I have to emphasize, the frame is around what's happening in the West Bank under a military occupation. You could say, well, that's an arbitrary framing. I don't think so. That's the frame, and what's taking place is, I would think, by any reasonable person's assessment, deeply troubling. So that's what I hold on to. This is not, in a way, a polemic. It's an attempt to document what's happening. And I maybe naively think that anyone would see it, or most people would see it and see it for what it was.